Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the industry update. We have Zach and Lauren here to give us an update on things in the state. As always, please keep your lines muted and use the chat feature for any questions at the end of the presentation. We will be recording this and sending it out later today. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to John to kick this off.
Thanks very much, Hope, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. Depending on where you are in the state, you're either under a foot of snow or it's 60 degrees and sunny like it is here in Harrisburg. So it's a crazy April in more than one way. As always, this is designed for the use of our hotel, restaurant, and travel and tourism partners and other friends of PRLA. What's being discussed today is off the record, so if you're with the press, please check in with us another time and we will be happy to answer any questions you may have. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Lauren Brinjac and Zak Pyzik, our phenomenal GA team here at PRLA.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate the kind words and good morning, everyone. Happy Webinar Wednesday. For those who do not know me, my name is Zak Pyzik. I am the Director of Government Affairs at the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association, and I'm joined today by Lauren Brinjac, PRLA Senior Director of Government Affairs. Lauren and I have a lot to cover this morning. We've got mask mandates to discuss, budget items to tackle, and even your favorite frozen desserts. We'll be tackling some federal, some state issues, and then we'll be covering some local subjects as well. And then lastly, just some general FYIs like your election related news. With that, I am going to turn things over to Lauren Brinjac to kick us off with a federal update on RRF.
Thanks, Zach. So news out of Congress is that the U.S. House earlier this month did pass legislation to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, or the RRF, with $42 billion. The legislation passed by a nearly but not quite party line vote of 223 to 203, with most but not all Democrats voting in favor and most but not all Republicans voting against. In terms of our Pennsylvania congressional delegation, the lone Republican who voted in favor of the legislation was Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick from Bucks County. Despite the favorable outcome for us in the House, the main obstacle in getting this legislation over the finish line has been and continues to be the Senate. We know that the Senate is not planning to address the issue when they return to session next week. And it's not clear at this point when or if they do take up RRF legislation, whether they will take up the House version of the bill that just passed or the Senate version of the bill, which was introduced by Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. Now, beginning Monday of next week, the PRLA Government Affairs team, and I think likely some of you who are here with us today, will be heading to Washington, D.C. for the National Restaurant Association's Public Affairs Conference. We've got a full slate of meetings already scheduled with our Pennsylvania congressional delegation to discuss all of the important issues affecting our industry. We're, of course, going to be talking about the RRF, but we've also got a number of other issues to discuss, including a new piece of legislation introduced in late March by Pennsylvania Congressman Lloyd Smucker, and that's called the Essential Workers for Economic Advancement Act. That would create a pathway for more workers to come to the U.S. through a new 3-year H-2C visa program, which would initially be available for up to 65,000 workers. We're also going to be advocating to bring back the Employee Retention Tax Credit for the fourth quarter of 2021. And there's pending legislation in both the U.S. House and Senate with bipartisan sponsorship. And so we will be talking to our legislators next week about the importance of all of those pieces of legislation to our industry. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Zach to round out our federal update and then talk a bit about the state of our state legislature.
Thank you, Lauren. Great federal update there. And just to round things out, I want to talk a little bit about the travel mask mandate. As many of you know already, on Monday, a federal judge in Florida struck down the Biden administration's mask mandate for airplanes and other public transportation methods. So what does that mean for all of us? What does that mean for the industry? The administration has said that the order will no longer be in effect until the ruling is reviewed. I've yet to see any reporting on an appeal being filed. The court said that the mandate is unlawful because it exceeded the authority, the statutory authority of the administration, and also violated administrative law. As you can imagine, that ruling has caused a lot of confusion, as have mask mandates in general very recently. Several airlines, all of the major ones, quickly announced that masks are now optional. It's unclear whether the Justice Department will seek an appeal, but like I noted, there has been nothing reported yet. The local angle here is mostly relevant in the southeastern portion of the state, where SEPTA, again here in southeastern Pennsylvania, announced that masks are no longer required and will be optional. They are now optional inside of stations and concourses. And this announcement came right after the federal court's ruling, also on Monday. So on the same day that Philly re-implemented the citywide mask mandate for indoor services that they are enforcing. And so that SEPTA policy, which applies to both employees and travelers, seems to be somewhat at conflict and contradicts with the Philly's mask mandate. And so it'll be interesting to see if the Kenney administration has any response to the decision that SEPTA made. As you know, Philly has gone against the grain and did impose their own mask mandate, and SEPTA is vocally not abiding by that due to the federal court's ruling that such mandates are not constitutional. And so SEPTA and Mayor Kenney have kind of gone at it before, and so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. At the end of the day, it's not likely that they can shut down mass transportation, and so I haven't seen any news on that yet, but I know this has caused a lot of confusion for our members, and so please stay tuned to the daily update where the PRLA team is putting any updates regarding mandates in Philadelphia in that email. Moving over to some state items, the state update here, the state of the legislature. The House and the Senate are both at ease. Neither chamber is in session in Harrisburg this week. The House returns next week on Monday, April 25th. The Senate is out the rest of the month. They will return, I think it was Monday, May 23rd is when they are back in town. Obviously, we're still looking at a lot of deliberation, a lot of discussion happening behind the scenes, especially regarding the budget. There are a few committee meetings that have been calendared. And meanwhile, we're getting a whole lot closer to the primary election. Lots of competitive races, lots of non-competitive races as well for us to all pay attention to. All eyes are on the governor's race here in Pennsylvania and also the race to replace Senator Pat Toomey. Obviously, the Democrats see that as a very flippable seat. And so it is getting a lot of news attention and candidates are raising a lot of money. The election is on May 17th. On the governor's side of things, we know that Attorney General Josh Shapiro is the only candidate running on the Democratic side of the ticket. And he's also been considered as, for the most part, as this year's favorite. There are 9 candidates, I believe, that are remaining on the GOP side of the governor's ticket here. Senator Mastriano, Lou Barletta, President Pro Temp Jake Corman, are still some of the favorites on that side of the race. We have a clearer picture of what the elections will look like in the state legislature as well. From an aerial view, we are looking at about 42, 43 Republicans in the House and about 22 Democrats that are not really facing any challenge in the primary election or the general election. That puts us at close to about 65 total in the House that pretty much have no competitive election at all. There are 2 Republicans and in the Senate and a handful of Democrats that are not facing any challenges in the primary or the general election as well. But in other words, we are looking at a lot of turnover in the state legislature. There will be 11 new chairs, for instance, in the PA House, which some may describe as an overhaul of the leadership structure. For some of the committees that we work with most often, like the House Liquor Control and the Senate Law and Justice Committee, we don't expect much to change in terms of leadership there, but there will be a new majority chair on both the House Tourism Committee, given that Chairman Millard will not be running for re-election, and also on the Senate Community Economic and Recreational Development Committee, given that Senator Udicek will not be running for re-election. And so a lot to watch there, and PRLA is keeping close tabs on some of the names and ideas being considered. Also worth noting here, while we're covering the state of the legislature, Governor Wolf recently announced earlier this week, I believe, that Acting Secretary Klein-Peter will be resigning from the Department of Health position with the Commonwealth on April 22nd. Governor Wolf is naming Physician General Dr. Denise Johnson to serve as Acting Secretary in the interim. Also, just some new legislation here that I'd like to cover. There is a bill some of our brewery members brought to our attention that I want to flag for those on today's call. Last week, House Bill 2519 was referred to the House Liquor Control Committee. The bill was introduced by Representative Mostello. This will allow local breweries to receive the 10% licensee discount found in the liquor code, as well as increase the amount of storage locations for breweries from 2 to 5. I just wanted to flag that for those who may be following. PRLA will keep a close eye on that legislation as it moves through the legislative process. I know that is something many of our members are keeping close tabs on. I'm also happy to report here that PRLA co-hosted a legislative dinner with members of the Senate Committee on Community, Economic, and Recreational Development. Last week, John Longstreet, Lauren Brinjac, and I, along with PRLA Chair Tom Neely, attended that meeting on behalf of PRLA. Senator Udicek attended. He is the majority chair of that committee, along with Senators Tomlinson, Senator Scavello, Senator Boscola, Senator Argol, and also Representative Tomlinson. We discussed a variety of legislation impacting the industry, and most importantly, the significance of more funding for tourism marketing here in Pennsylvania. It was a very productive conversation and a great dinner, especially, this is especially important as we due to a request that we made and conversations that we've been having with the chair regarding the formation of tourism improvement districts. As many of you know, there are already 3 TIDs established in Pennsylvania, but this legislation would create a streamlined process for that procedure. We're hoping to schedule a hearing to discuss and vet that legislation sometime later this spring or in the summer. Thank you very much to all of our members who have been leading that charge. Senator Udicek also recently circulated a co-sponsorship memo regarding legislation that would create a sales tax holiday for restaurants in Pennsylvania. I want to thank you all for your feedback and just all of our members, and especially our Government Affairs Committee for sending us and providing feedback on that subject, as Senator Udicek looked at a variety of options that could help the industry. Also, thank you very much out of our Brandywine chapter, Bob Raffetto, who's on this call, for helping provide some ideas on that legislation as well. It turns out Senator Udicek is looking to model that legislation off of what was enacted in Tennessee. So this would provide an exemption on sales tax for things like restaurant equipment, food ingredients, food supplies, and potentially other materials that again are applicable to specifically restaurants. So please contact your senators on both of these bills and ask them to co-sponsor this legislation if they are interested. We know that both of these bills will significantly help the broader hospitality industries here in Pennsylvania. And with that, I want to turn things back over to Lauren to discuss some legislation on the move.
Thanks, Zach. So as Zach alluded to, the House and Senate were in session last week, so it was a busy week in Harrisburg, and we saw some other legislation relevant to PRLA move as well. I talked to Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill, who is planning to introduce legislation that would amend the liquor code, allowing licensees to use loudspeakers outside, provided that the sound does not exceed 75 decibels beyond their property line. Now, this would apply to licensees in counties class 2A through class 8. So that would exclude Philadelphia. There's a version of this legislation in the House that PRLA supports, but since it's currently stalled in the House, Senator Phillips-Hill is introducing it to get it moving in the Senate. We've heard that the chair of the Senate Law and Justice Committee supports this measure, and we're hearing that this is something that we could see move out of committee later this spring. Secondly, PRLA supported legislation which addresses our very outdated frozen dessert law is moving in both the State House and Senate. The House and Senate bills are different, but both address the current burdensome and we think duplicative monthly testing requirements. The House bill would repeal the law in its entirety, and we're happy to report that this bill passed out of the House nearly unanimously last week. I think there was one lone no vote. The Senate version of the bill, which would rewrite rather than repeal the law and require that frozen dessert tests be conducted annually rather than monthly, was voted unanimously out of the Senate Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recently, and it received second consideration in the Senate last week. So with both a House and Senate bill moving with little to no opposition, we're hopeful that this is legislation that is something we can accomplish this legislative session. On another note, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee last week also passed legislation PRLA supports. This is Senate Bill 749, which would amend the Medical Marijuana Act to provide greater clarity and workplace safety guidance to employers relative to employees' use of medical marijuana. On the topic of marijuana, we've reported during past industry updates that the Senate Law and Justice Committee earlier this year held a series of 3 public hearings to examine the legalization of recreational marijuana. This is an initiative that is supported by the Republican chair of that committee, Senator Mike Regan. We saw last week, however, when the Senate was in session, that there certainly is a measure of disagreement within the Republican caucus on this topic. Senator Judy Ward, who attended the previous hearings as a member of the Law and Justice Committee, is also herself the chair of the Senate Aging and Youth Committee, and she just held her own hearing on this topic in her committee. She's publicly expressed her concerns that the topic of legalizing recreational marijuana this year is not being thoroughly vetted. So in her hearing, she brought in some experts to discuss the potential negative effects of legalization of marijuana for children and youth in Pennsylvania. I will say it still seems unlikely to us that the legislature passes a legalization bill this year, especially during an election year, but we are staying in touch with the Law and Justice Committee to make sure we're involved in this conversation and have had the opportunity to weigh in on any draft language should they decide to bring any legislation up for a vote this spring. And then finally, just a reminder that in late March, the Independent Regulatory Review Commission, or IRC, voted unanimously to approve a Department of Labor and Industry regulation to raise pay for those who receive the tipped minimum wage. So under this new updated regulation, the amount in tips a worker must receive monthly will increase from $30 to $135 before the employer can pay that employee the tipped wage. This new regulation also aligns Pennsylvania with the recent 80-20 federal rule, which means that an employee must spend at least 80% of his or her time on tipped work to be classified as a tipped employee and be paid below that $7.25 an hour threshold. This approved regulation is currently with the Office of the Attorney General for approval, and then following that, it will go into effect in 90 days. So we are monitoring this regulation and we'll keep our members updated on when exactly that effective date will be. Moving on a bit to some of the issues that we are working on at the local level. In Pittsburgh, legislation calling for a ban on almost all single-use plastic bags was passed by Pittsburgh City Council last week. That new ordinance was also just signed by Mayor Gainey, and it will ban most single-use plastic bags and then implement a fee of no less than 10 cents for paper bags. This measure is quite similar to one that is in place in Philadelphia already, and which has just started to be enforced there, I think earlier this month. We did raise concerns about this measure and its timing really in Pittsburgh, and we were successful in getting the enforcement date extended. So the original version of the proposal would have had this ban go into effect in 6 months. So we got that extended to 1 year. So what we're looking at is an April 14th of 2023 date before the bag ban will be enforced in Pittsburgh. Secondly, as you may know, the Pittsburgh City Council in February unanimously approved a bill that will allow restaurants to continue using sidewalks and streets for outdoor dining. We were very supportive of that legislation. The new ordinance is in effect, and the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure right now is finalizing its guidelines to implement this ordinance and to issue the new annual licenses. We've reviewed the draft guidance. We're happy with it. We think it's going to allow our members to continue to operate their outdoor streeteries without too many changes. We're also happy to see that there is not going to be any annual fee associated with these new permits in 2022. In the meantime, while this guidance is being finalized, operators can continue using their current outdoor dining setups. And then finally, as some of you may have seen in the news, there was a deadly shooting at an Airbnb property in Pittsburgh over the weekend. 2 teenagers were killed and a number of other people, I think 8 people, were injured. So as a result, new legislation was just introduced to Pittsburgh City Council yesterday with the intent to regulate Airbnb and other short-term rental units in the city. PRLA has long advocated for a level playing field for our hotels and bed and breakfasts as it relates to these online home sharing platforms, not just to eliminate unfair competition, but also to ensure the health and safety of Pennsylvania visitors. So we are currently reviewing this new legislation very closely, and we'll be offering any necessary feedback to City Council as we look into this further. That's kind of in a nutshell what we're working on in Pittsburgh. So I will kick it back over to Zach for a Philadelphia update.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. I'll start here with the mask mandate, which has been making national news out of Philadelphia. As many of you know, the mask mandate has taken effect in Philadelphia again due to the spike in the metrics that the city is using. Specifically, that's regarding the case counts and the case percentages specifically, and then also they look at hospitalizations as well. Philadelphia remains the only major city to have reinstituted an indoor mask requirement, even though last time I looked, the CDC still puts Philadelphia at that low to mild risk category. Some of you may have seen that a group of Philadelphia residents and business owners have officially filed a lawsuit in the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania to overturn the city's mandate. PRLA is watching that lawsuit very closely, as well as other challenges. The one thing that PRLA is pushing for right now is a potential change in the metrics. We do believe strongly that the city ought to be looking a lot closer at hospitalizations than they are at things like case percentages and case counts, especially given that nowadays a lot of folks are taking those tests at home. The reporting isn't the same as it used to be, and that definitely can influence the case count and the percentage numbers specifically. We are having a meeting this afternoon with some of our Philadelphia chapter members to discuss next steps, and we are working very closely with our stakeholders in Philadelphia to figure out a solid and practical path forward on challenging that mask mandate. Also in Philadelphia, we are working on streetery regulations. In February, the streets department proposed regulations to Philadelphia's permanent streetery program. We collected feedback from members on the regulations when they were posted, and we worked with many of you to identify some of your top concerns. The administration held a public hearing earlier this year on those regulations, and that was officially requested by Councilmember Dom with the support of the PRLA. I again want to thank the dozens of members, some of you on this call who showed up to voice your concerns at that hearing. We are still hoping that the city will consider the changes and recommendations that we made around the license fee, around the security bond, and a few of the other items that we addressed. We're also asking that pre-approved designs be issued and that there would be transparency on the process to assure that there's a streamlined application process for members and operators in the city. We are expecting the city to start honing in on any final changes any day now. We last heard from the law department earlier this week. They still have not publicized anything yet that we're aware of. When we heard from them, They did note that there are a few items that they are still working through. We were expecting an update around April 11th. Unfortunately, there's been a few things that have changed in the city, specifically the rollout of this mask mandate. Not sure whether or not that's influencing anything with the outdoor dining program, but nevertheless, we're keeping a close eye on it. It is important to note here, though, to just keep in mind that if the restaurant industry, if the hospitality industry asks for any additional input, there's a chance that the city wants to respect that and honor that. But the problem is that would delay the process, and that would delay the finalizing the formal regulations and the final regs. And so, just something that I wanted to note for anybody on that call, on this call today. Also, the budget in Philadelphia. I want to transition now to the budget. It is budget season in Philly as well, just like it is at the state level. Mayor Kenny again proposed a close to a $6 billion budget that includes no tax rate increases at all. Presented the budget to the council a few weeks ago. The proposal calls for increased spending at about 5.5%, and they're proposing that they spend only about $330 million of the $1.4 billion that the city received in federal pandemic aid. This specifically came from the American Rescue Plan. That would leave more than about $800 million untouched. And we know, especially in this industry, that the industry needs it now more than ever. And so, we are starting conversations with City Council, specifically with the Finance Committee, on seeing how, if there's any path forward for potential grant programs and relief programs for operators in the city. I think this is an especially important conversation given the rollout of the new mask mandate policy that impacts Philadelphia operators specifically, and no other county throughout the state of Pennsylvania. This will be Mayor Kenny's second to last budget plan. He is planning to leave office in January of 2024. Again, just some items on the budget in case you're interested. The proposal leaves the wage and business tax rates unchanged. Even with that, the city is still anticipating a 7% increase in the wage tax collections. The big line item here is about $23.7 million additional dollars that will be going to the police department, putting them at a total budget of $782 million. Many of you have reached out to PRLA about the increase that we've seen in crime in the city of Philadelphia. And so this is something that I thought was worth flagging for everyone on this call. Also, this is not included in the slides. This just came off of the press yesterday, but also out of Philadelphia, a federal judge did declare a mistrial in the federal bribery trial of Philadelphia City Council member Kenyatta Johnson and his wife. The jury told the judge that they reached an impasse in the case on Monday. Prosecutors claim that Johnson accepted bribes to aid a financially struggling nonprofit, but nevertheless, a mistrial is where they've landed. The decision was reached after about 25 hours of deliberation, and ultimately they were deadlocked. The prosecution is saying that they will retry the case. So we will keep you updated on all that Philadelphia news, not only in the daily update, but when we're back on this webinar as well in early May. Now turning to the next slide here, the FYIs. First thing I want to cover, some new legislators. There will be more than 32 state reps and senators that are not running for re-election or or retiring. Just to name a few, Representative Mike Driscoll will likely be replacing former council member Bobby Heenan in the city of Philadelphia. Representative Jim Cox will not be running for re-election. Representative Kurt Masser from Northumberland County, Representative Frank Ferry from the Bucks area, Representative Mark Longetti, Representatives Daryl Metcalf, Brian Sims, Dave Hickernell, Kurt Sani, and Frank Ryan. And there are also some more in the Senate. Senators Mario Scavello, Senators John Udicek, and Jake Corman will not be running for re-election as well. So like I noted earlier in the program here, it's going to be a very different legislature the next year, like we discussed earlier. Also, again, want to say congratulations to the winners of the 3 special elections that were held recently across Pennsylvania. Democrat Martell Covington won in the race to replace Pittsburgh Mayor Ed Gainey's former House seat. Democrat Arian Abney ran unopposed and won the seat that was vacated by Representative Jake Wheatley, who went on to become Mayor Gainey's chief of staff. And then Republican Robert Schnee won the seat vacated by former Representative Tara Toohill, who you may recall won her election for the judge of Court of Common Pleas in Luzerne County last November. Some tourism updates here that we wanted to discuss with the group. We've been working very hard on our 2022 tourism legislative priorities. I just saw some disappointing numbers yesterday, but unfortunately these numbers are all too real, and many of you know this already, but I just want to highlight a few of these top line items. The American Hotel and Lodging Association projects that U.S. hotel, the industry right now is down about 23% below pre-pandemic levels. Hotels lost an estimated $108 billion in business travel revenue during 2020 and 2021, and that's combined. Leisure travel, many are expecting to return to pre-pandemic levels this year, but we know business travel, however, which includes corporate, group, and even government, is the hotel industry's largest source of revenue. And many experts are saying that's going to take a lot longer to recover. So it's important that we keep the pressure on the legislature now more than ever, especially as they discuss and deliberate on this year's budget. One update here that I want to flag for the group, especially for our Northeastern Pennsylvania members on the call. Some of you may have heard Margaritaville announced the first Margaritaville Resort Village, a new family-friendly destination that will be located in the Pocono Mountains. They will begin construction in 2023, and I believe they plan to open in mid-2024. That will be located, for those of you familiar with the area, that will be located at the original Pocono Manor in Monroe County. They've got nice basketball courts there. I used to play a lot of basketball there as a kid. There will be pools, restaurants, live entertainment, etc. PRLA is keeping a close eye on all of the infrastructure spending that we're seeing, specifically in that area, because a lot of the funding is going to places like Northeastern Pennsylvania. And so it'll be interesting to see how investments like those will impact the broader tourism landscape in regions like that. So also an update here on the PA tourism study. Two of our biggest tourism priorities for 2022 involve the appropriations of state dollars. We are asking for $20 million for state tourism funding and $15 million for DMOs in House Bill 554. We've recently discussed honing in on a more precise dollar amount for those asks. There's been a lot that has changed in the tourism economy due to the pandemic. And because of that, we'd like to update a study that we first commissioned in 2015. That study, conducted by Tourism Economics and Adam Sachs, showed that there's a 3-to-1 return on investment for every dollar spent on tourism promotion. And that's just in tax dollars. The PRLA board did vote unanimously to update that study. We've been moving forward with that project, and we're very excited to see the results, especially given that we've seen, again, unprecedented investments in tourism in places like Arizona, Michigan, and now Illinois, with the news that was flagged this week for us. That study will likely be published around May 1. I had a call with the tourism economics team last week. We are still on track for that deadline. It'll give us about 45 to 60 days to use the updated version of this study to advocate for some of our top tourism priorities. Hopefully will help us secure the much needed funding that we're seeking in this budget. I just want to thank so many of the DMOs and other tourism partners out there that have helped sponsor this project. I'm really excited to see the results. We plan on taking that new material to the Hill and using it for our advocacy. And the last update that I've got here, well, actually, I guess I got two more things to cover, and then I'll turn it back over to Lauren. Marijuana in New Jersey, marijuana sales will officially start in New Jersey tomorrow, April 21st. I heard rumors that they just couldn't do it on 420 because of the optics, as you can imagine. It will be interesting to track how this new economy in a bordering state will impact the travel and tourism industries here in Pennsylvania. There will be 13 locations opening in the Garden State that will include 6 in South Jersey. We're keeping a close eye on legal cannabis in other states, given recent discussion that we've had at PRLA with our policy committee, specifically at the 2022 committee retreat. We want to know, how is it being done in other states? What can we learn from what they're doing in other states? Hindsight can be our best friend here, especially since it may one day come to Pennsylvania. The way they approach the dispensaries in New Jersey as of now is that they allowed all 13 medical dispensaries that existed in the state to just expand their operations to include recreational sales. That's a big point of contention, as you can imagine, here in Pennsylvania. So lots to keep track of as they consider various pieces of legislation on this subject. And it'll be interesting to see how this impacts tourism in Pennsylvania, if at all. On the Lehigh Valley Legislative Roundtable item, I just wanted to note that last week PRLA hosted our second Legislative Roundtable of the year. It was a great group. John Longstreet, Lauren, Heidi, and I attended on behalf of PRLA. We had some great discussion regarding some of our legislative priorities, especially on items like the licensee discount and tourism funding. Representative McNeil attended, both Representative McKenzie's were able to be there, and we had representation. We had the Chief of Staff from Senator Pat Brown's office and also Chief of Staff from Senator Boscola's office. It was a great event. The next event is the Philadelphia Chapter Legislative Roundtable. That is going to be in Philly on May 10th. Invites for that just started going out this week. And with that, wanted to turn it back over to Lauren to cover the GOP debate from last night.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And just wanted to add my 2 cents about the legislative roundtables. These are really great events and a great opportunity to have almost a more casual conversation with our state lawmakers sort of on their turf. And so I encourage everyone who's able to attend the event in their chapter. Talking about the GOP debate, as we are inching ever closer to the elections, including the primary election, which is less than a month out now, including the election for Pennsylvania's next governor. As Zach mentioned, the Democratic candidate, Attorney General Josh Shapiro, is in the enviable position of running unopposed in his primary. That is certainly not the case on the Republican side, where there will be 9 candidates on the ballot. Last night, 5 of those 9 Republicans faced off in a debate at Gettysburg College, and that included Jake Corman, who you might have seen dropped out of the race very briefly last week and then got back in after a personal phone call from President Donald Trump encouraging him to jump back in. The other candidates at the debate last night were Joe Gale, Charlie Giroux, Melissa Hart, and Dr. Enche Zamo. Noticeably absent from the debate were 4 candidates who some polls have suggested are the frontrunners, including the top 2, at least in some polls, State Senator Doug Mastriano and former Congressman Lou Barletta. The candidates on stage last night saved most of their criticisms for those absent candidates. And while they agreed on a lot of the issues, perhaps not surprisingly, there were some differences, especially in terms of issues that affect our industry. When it came to legalizing recreational marijuana, candidate Charlie Giroux said that he would sign legislation if a bill came to his desk. Senator Corman said that he's never been comfortable with the idea of legalization, but if elected governor, he'd be willing to listen to those who supported it, though he noted that it would probably take a lot of convincing for him to sign a piece of legislation. And then candidates Joe Gale, Melissa Hart, and Dr. Zamo were all pretty straightforward in opposing legalizing recreational marijuana. Also of note, I'll say that although all of the candidates had somewhat different ideas about how they would spend Pennsylvania's currently unspent remaining American Rescue Plan money, including different ideas about infrastructure, and I certainly will be paying attention to how all of these races shake out. So I think having said all that, I think that just about wraps it up for us today. Zach and I and the rest of the team here at PRLA will continue to update you on all of these issues. If you have any questions, please note it in the chat and we will try to get an answer to you. As always, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Hope.
Thanks, Lauren. I know Eric, we've been having some technical difficulties in our office today with our phones and our computers, so I think he's going to try and bring the screen back up. But on the upcoming events and webinars, we do have our leadership forum coming up in June in Lancaster. We'd We have some really great speakers coming. Meredith Elliott Powell, Jeff Butler, and Rachel Dialto will be there. The board of directors will be meeting earlier on the 6th, and then we will have the programming all day on the 6th and the 7th. So please check this out on our website. You can see the calendar, and Heidi just threw it up into the chat too. It's a really great day, and we're excited to be back in person and having this event again. The next slide, Eric. We will have some in-person events coming up with our chapters. We've been having a lot of Zoom calls, Zoom meetings with some really great panels, but next week and then the first week of May, we will be back in person. So please join us for some networking and some great food and drinks at the Brandywine event. And then out in Western PA, we will be at the Wyndham Pittsburgh, and Heidi's throwing that up there too. So you can go out there and register for these events. And out in the Northwestern chapter will be in person again too. So we're looking forward to seeing everybody, and we hope you can make it out to these meetings. And lastly, we will be just talking a little bit about ServSafe. As always, we have classes going on, but we will be having Renee Hoge and Jenna Henderson joining us on the industry update on the 18th. Brief review of the different training products that are available on the ServSafe Ops program. We're really excited about these programs, and think that we wanted to put a little more attention to them so that you could see what they were all about. And with that, I think that is the end